And we're live, and welcome back, everyone. Onan here. Hope you can hear me okay. Adjust my mic here a little bit. Um, I have about 20 to 30 minutes here. My wife has jury duty again today, and I'm just watching the youngster. She's still sleeping while I wait for the sitter to arrive, and I wanted to address something that Jonah and I may or may not talk about tomorrow when we record UCM, but I wanted to for sure make sure I had a chance to talk about it in this channel, and it's the question of the problem of porn, and I guess to some extent some of the other sexual sins slash matters like solo, and I mean I guess that would be most. I'm not here to talk about affairs and cheating and all that stuff, but let's just talk just about porn. Let's just talk about porn for the most part. Um, and specifically within the context of Catholic marriage, and what do we do about it? Like it or not, porn is a problem even in Catholic marriages, and I would say, quote, good Catholic marriages. Although, as I'll talk about here in a moment, there are people dispute the idea that you can have a good Catholic marriage if porn is being used at all. I suppose that's something that can be debated, but let's acknowledge the fact that it happens. And one thing that I think really people really struggle with, and I think I'm going to use my words carefully here, I think in a particular way wives may struggle with this, is being able to distinguish between explaining how or why something happens and providing a justification for it. I think those are two different things. I think those are two different approaches to a problem that everyone understands as a problem. So there's no one, I don't think there's anyone, myself included, who are saying that porn use is okay in marriage or whatever. No one in the conversation is making that claim. What we are acknowledging is that it happens, and there are people dispute why it happens, but no one really disputes that it happens in that it's bad when it happens, right? So let's just get that. Let's get out there right in the way. I fit firmly in that camp. Anyone that struggles with that, obviously go to confession for it, seek advice. I'm in no way equipped to help people identify how to deal with that problem, but it's a problem, and for guys especially, when they have that problem, it can be something really difficult to overcome. At least that's kind of what I've heard from others. So, what do we do about that? In the particular thing I want to focus on is this, because it came up yesterday over on Twitter, and in some ways it's still going on over on Twitter. And I don't necessarily agree with all of the ideas people have about the topic. There was one guy, kind of a cool name, Uncharted Father, kind of got himself into some trouble because I don't know if he's Catholic or not. I can't tell. Looks like maybe he's been through a divorce and some difficulties, and in sort of, I guess, in a roundabout way, kind of blamed wives that their husbands are using porn. Um, I I don't I don't agree with that. Certainly not as a general statement. Are there circumstances where maybe there is some fault? Maybe, I guess. So I wouldn't make the generalization that he does, but what I would do is it's so a very kind of a large account traditional Catholic wife caught hold of that and basically, or what she said exactly, but you know, don't be a sleaze bag. It's the man's fault, et cetera, et cetera. Which, yes, I mean, ultimately, responsibility lies on the actor. No one is saying otherwise, myself included. But there are predictable circumstances that either make it easier to engage in that or make it more difficult for men to resist that, however you want to look at it. I think circumstances do matter. And I think there are circumstances that can happen in marriage unintentionally that can make men more prone to that. And the one point that I made, and this is sort of based on my observation of talking to a lot of other men, I get to talk to a lot of people, especially men, off the record in a very kind of confidential way, and I learn things that maybe a lot of people don't. And I think one of the factors, not the factor, maybe not the cause, but I think a factor for a lot of men who turn to porn at some point in time do so because they feel, rightly or wrongly, that they're not really wanted or desired in their marriage. And I think maybe especially true for Catholic men, maybe I mean, I think men desire to be desired. I don't think there's any real dispute that men tend to pursue sexual intimacy more than their wives, but I think men in particular want and desire to be desired and loved. Um, I don't know why that is. I would say I fit into that category. I think there is something in us, something masculine about wanting to know that your spouse desires you and wants to be with you and all that kind of stuff. And humans are strange in that I think we can be very hard on ourselves, because it sort of relates to another conversation that stemmed from this about women and their bodies and how it changes. And I think one of the arguments this original guy made was wives should take care of themselves a little more, and maybe their husband wouldn't go seeking out porn. And I don't necessarily agree with that, but one thing I think it does emphasize that I think a lot of women, a lot of wives especially, have poor body images. And I think in a lot of marriages, men continue to find their wives beautiful even as we age, even as we have children, and things aren't as perky as they used to be. I think a lot of men still find their wives extremely attractive, and I think a lot of wives struggle to find themselves attractive, right? And it doesn't matter how many times he says he thinks she's beautiful. If she doesn't believe it herself, she probably isn't going to believe him, right? And so you can have this situation where, from the husband's standpoint, he does find his wife attractive and isn't looking at anyone else, but his wife doesn't feel that way about herself. So you have this disconnect between reality, and she may think that he doesn't find he she may have a hard time or just be completely unable to believe that her husband finds her attractive if she herself doesn't find herself attractive. You can't mentally bridge that gap. So you have that kind of um, disparity there, that disconnect between reality and someone's perceptions. I think the same thing can and does happen for men, in that their wives may very well desire them, find them desirable and attractive and handsome, but the husband may not necessarily believe that. And in particular, if he doesn't hear it, um, or doesn't hear it very often, he may have a hard time believing that he's desirable or desired. And I think that can create a situation where husbands can become lonely. And one of the porn is often described as being unrealistic, and I think one of the unrealistic things that it creates is this belief, this dynamic that husbands are all become porn stars, and the women will just throw themselves at you and enjoying every moment of it and all that. I think that is something that's the way it's. I mean, I think there's a reason why porn is probably created with that theme, because it's trying to um, target an unmet need that that man has, or unmet want, however you want to look at it. And so if a husband is in a marriage and he doesn't feel like he is wanted, whether his wife wants him or communicates it, if he doesn't believe it, he's going to feel unwanted. He's going to feel lonely. And I personally believe, just, and this is just purely my anecdotal observation and talking to people, is I think men in that situation are going to be more likely to seek out porn than those that genuinely and sincerely believe they are wanted. And that's just stating kind of more of a fact. That's sort of recognizing the relationship between those things. What I'm not doing, and this is very critical, what I'm not doing is making a value judgment about that or justifying the man's decision to seek out porn in that situation. There's a critical difference between recognizing why something happens and justifying that it happens. And I think this is something that people struggle to keep those two things separate. And I think it's why so much of the dialogue just turns into a complete mess, is people hear someone explaining why something happens, but in their mind they hear that as a justification for it. And some guys, I mean, I think some people do justify things, but I think the vast majority of the time we're just talking about why things happen, not justifying them. Okay. And so that, I think, is something that really, really needs to be identified in Catholic circles as we talk about these things. And then the one thing that I really want to talk about that came up in this Twitter fight, because I kind of got into a Twitter fight with this Catholic trad lady, um, and so I went on to say, because she, of course, disputed that there could be anything the wife could do, even unknowingly, that could lead her husband to do that. And I think I made the comment that good men and good marriages can still fall prey to porn. She really recoiled at that. She said, by definition, you're not a good man if you use porn, and your marriage isn't good. And I mean, maybe it's a matter of semantics. I tend to think that good men can and do struggle with this, can and do have good marriages. And for one reason, I mean, it's just one of these things that is very insidious, and it's everywhere. And especially if the man has a past experience with it, addiction or not, it can be really, really easy during the lonely times of marriage to slip back into that. And I don't think that should be seen as a judgment on the overall quality of the marriage. It's obviously not something you want to happen, but I also don't think it means that there's something just irreparably wrong with that marriage. He's dealing with some things, it's a sin. He needs to overcome it. So then the question is, how does he overcome it? How does the husband overcome that? And where I got into the dispute with this lady, I said, well, because she was very hostile to the idea that a man could be a good man if he's dealing with these things. And I said, just so you understand, this is why a lot of men, if they struggle with this, are not going to tell their wives. They're not going to tell their wives because, well, they're understandably embarrassed by it, ashamed of it, as they should be. But beyond that, they believe that their wife will view them as a bad man now? And will their wife view this entirely as something that he needs to deal with? And, how is she going to react to that? And I'm not sure I know how spouses should react to it, but just from a very practical standpoint, if a husband, he's already dealing with it himself. Let's hope that he's dealing with it in the confessional and he's seeking spiritual guidance and whatever. But this is something he's probably going to keep to himself, especially if he thinks it's something that's going to get him condemned by his spouse. And I think this is something we really, really need to take seriously, because as a spouse, if your spouse, your husband, is struggling with this, how would you react to that? Would you be supportive of his problem, not condoning it, again, not saying it's okay, but would you be supportive of the fact that he's a fallen man struggling with this and he's wanting to overcome it and he wants to be transparent with you, whatever? Are you going to be able to give him space to be vulnerable and sorry? Or are you going to condemn, reject, whatever him? And if it's going to be on the side of condemnation and rejection, just know he's not going to tell you. He's going to deal with it in secret, and he's going to, because he's dealing with a secret, it's probably more likely that it's going to persist and maybe become a chronic addictive problem. Something like this is a if you believe it's your business as the wife to know if your husband is dealing with this stuff or vice versa, it is necessarily also your burden as his spouse to be there for him and lift him up and support him in a positive way. And I think this is something that is probably very, very uncommon in marriages, and it's one of these things that I think men struggle with, and are just petrified to share that with their spouses. And I would take this a step further because we're Catholics here. I would say the same thing is true for men that struggle with the solo stuff, whether it's with porn or not. I know there are men, I know there are plenty of men who don't have a porn issue but struggle with the solo stuff. And from a Catholic standpoint, they're both grave matters, they're both potentially mortal sins. I see stuff online that would more or less equate going solo with or without porn as being the same thing as adultery, which I think is just, I mean, that is not helpful, right? A husband that does that is not the same thing as a husband who goes out and cheats on his wife. It's just not. And we should stop treating it as if it is, especially practically, but I think even morally, we need to be able to recognize those are different things. One is very much a sin of weakness. The other is much more of a volitional, like you have to go out and like act on that, right? Um, and I think this is a real problem for men, especially, um, who deal with these kinds of sexual matters, these sins, these failings, and have every reason to be concerned about their ability to share this vulnerable situation with their spouse and be able to then approach it as a collective, as a team. Because what ends up happening is it becomes his burden, his problem, and as it becomes longer and longer without a solution, he becomes more and more depressed, more and more hopeless, more and more possibly even resentful to his spouse, to God, to the church, whatever the case may be. And this is all going on in the background because the husband doesn't necessarily feel like he has the freedom and the safety to share this with his spouse. And I think this is something that really needs to be addressed in a positive, responsible Catholic way. And that's all I'm asking here. All I'm asking here, especially for any of the wives out there that hear this, please consider my words, because they're genuine, they're sincere, they're based on having spoken with a lot of men. Some of it, my own personal experience in the past. Um, I'm very confident in what I'm telling you here, and I think you just have to ask yourself: if my spouse was doing this stuff, would he feel comfortable coming to me? If I found out, what would be my reaction? I think you really need to ask yourself that question if it hasn't come up before. And if it has come up before, and the reaction was, let's say, hostile, less than supportive, if it was judgmental, just realize that that is probably his last impression of that, is going to reinforce the idea that he must never let you know what is going on. And so I want to really, really encourage wives in a special way, because this, for whatever reason, seems to be an issue that men struggle with much more than women. And to the extent that women, I think a lot of wives just have no issue whatsoever with this stuff, and their husbands may be dealing with it all the time. And so it can be really hard to even appreciate what the other side is going through. But I think it's really, really important for us as Catholics to be able to handle these things as they come up, and recognize that your husband, if he's struggling with these things, has some things he has to deal with, needs to be honest with his confessor, needs to pray, but also needs you to be his wife in the midst of that. And I hope and pray that people will approach it this way, and maybe have some conversations about these things, because if it never comes up, you might be surprised at what your husband is struggling with. So maybe it's something you prepare yourself for, and approach him, and let me know. Maybe I'm completely wrong. Maybe all the wives will go home and ask their husbands, and whether your husband's going to tell you the truth or not, I think is going to depend on how he thinks you're going to react to it. So if you can assure him confidently that he's not going to be condemned, he's going to be loved and received for what it is, and I think you might be surprised at how many men acknowledge they have had struggles with this, or maybe are continuing to struggle with it. So I want to throw that out there. So my little girl is waking up, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap this stream up. I appreciate everyone who's showing up in the chats. Please leave a comment afterwards if you have any questions, if you agree or disagree. Otherwise, I appreciate everyone who listens to this. And until next time, everyone, have a good one.